and I'm going to wait until I get a co-host in here in order to be able to begin the show. So if I'm kicked off again, we won't lose the space. It is crazy. I'm not even exactly sure why they do backups to X when, in fact, or not backups, updates. They've yet to fix a single thing that I find wrong with the site, namely the spaces and the fact that they malfunction literally every single day. Finally, I was in another space that was experiencing some of the same uh, problems. As a matter of fact, the space that Thomas Massey had the other night, in which he was a guest in, I tried to log on like 4 different times on my way home from dinner. It must have been last night. And it wouldn't even let me. As soon as I hit join the space, I got a white screen. So it wouldn't even let me be part of it. And evidently, one of you brilliant people asked him about the coup in Bangladesh, and he said that he was going to see there. I'm just watching the screen and watching people disappear out of our space. It's crazy. But anyway, I have made some notes from my Bangladesh research because Warhamster Brady and I were going to actually do a show on Bangladesh. So I have several notes, and he is left X to come to Rumble. I prefer Rumble. I'm telling you, love seeing your face. That's really my only complaint about Rumble is not that I do it every single time, but I do at least have to brush my hair. And on days when I'm having a bad hair day, I at least have the ability to wear a hat. So it's all good. That's why I love doing X's, is because you don't have to, you can do it anywhere. It's a wonderful idea. It just doesn't work for the material that we want to do. Okay, Silk Purse says, FYI, Kit Clarensburg and Anna Parapil. Why can't people just have Smith for a last name? Max Blumenthal's wife wrote Corporate Coup, Venezuela, and the End of the U.S. Empire. Kit was detained, interrogated at the airport to re-enter the UK in 2023. That's very interesting. All right, there's Bridget. Let's get her up here. And it says that he was detained by plainclothes, I assume, cops. And by the way, Max is Blumenthal was mentioned, and Kit is the one whose article I used last night when we did the Alpha Warrior show. So excellent poster, reporter, investigative reporter, whatever term he would prefer us to use. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I think everybody needs to go follow his profile over on X. Again, I want to reemphasize something about this entire research project. The one thing people has to get over is only reading people they politically agree with. That's the biggest bunch of bullshit ever. I read a lot of people's material that I don't politically agree with. And we've talked about that, but I know we've got lots of new people here. The guy that really turned me into a rabid historical reader. You guys know that I've only ever read nonfiction, but really focusing it on military stuff was a guy by the name of Major General Larry Twitchell. If you guys go back in history, his family was tied to the Twitchell family that you will hear talked about when they were doing the original Aramco Saudi Arabia oil. There was a Twitchell involved in that as well, because he is originally from Texas, and that Twitchell family was a Texas oil company. He was an Air Force, he was a fighter pilot, he was an F-16 pilot, and he got off active duty and flew for a couple of different airlines, and maintained his military affiliation as a reserve general officer. And I first met him when I was the exec officer up at the Pentagon, in the Chief of the Air Force Reserves front office, and instantly fell in love with this man. He is just one of those guys that has a personality that is just so amazing. And when he retired, he moved down to Florida. He was the reserve augmentee to General Walds on 9/11. And so he got mobilized, and he was on active duty for the several years as it related to the 9/11 response, because General Wald was the CENTAF commander, meaning Central Command's air component commander. And General Twitchell was his augmentee in time of war. General Wald, normally his office was at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. His command center picks up and moves to Qatar, to the CENTCOM command post over there. And General Twitchell basically came in mobilized as the CENTAF rear commander, meaning he stayed at Shaw. And he's the guy that I dealt with in getting my augmentation at CENTCOM from the Air Force, because he's the air component to CENTCOM. And so I already knew him. It was great being able to deal with him because he knew who I was. And he, after that kind of calmed down a little bit, he was asked by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force to do a 3-year active duty tour as the USAMITM commander, which is basically the U.S. training military command in Saudi Arabia. And so he was over there for 3 years on active duty as the entire center commander. And as such, all components of the military, Marines, Navy, Army, and Air Force that train their Saudi counterparts fell under the command of General Twitchell. So because now he's in Saudi, which is part of CENTCOM as well. And my follow-on after I left CENTCOM, I went to Air War College, and then I was stationed in Texas. Well, his family was from Austin, Texas, which is like just right up I-35. So we had dinner a whole bunch of times when he would come home to Texas from Saudi. And he retired eventually here in Florida. He remarried. And just, again, a wonderful man. When I lost my dad in 2007, he came to the funeral because he knew, obviously we got to know each other very well. He knew my relationship with my dad, and it just meant the world to me that he did that. And so just, he's the one that, and the whole reason I told you that story is because his advice to me when we were dealing with the issues in CENTCOM is, if you really want to know the real story, is read both sides of any argument. Obviously, the big thing going on in the Middle East was the Israeli-Palestine issue, as well as the Shia versus Sunni relationships. Because again, we create fault lines in order to exacerbate problems. So I took that to heart. And he also, any book that he read, when he would come down to CENTCOM, he would bring me like a suitcase full of books. I would say probably at least 30 to 40 of the books in my other normal library came from him, because he was an avid reader too. And being at CENTAF, and then obviously eventually at USAMITM, he had a lot of books dealing with those issues on both sides of it. And you guys know that when we did the Vietnam segment of our world tour of Operation Gladio, I used Doug Valentine's book on the Phoenix program. Doug Valentine and I probably would be like literally on the North and South Pole when it comes to political or social issues, but there's no one that has researched that issue more than him. And the same thing with Polgrain, Professor Polgrain, who wrote about the Indonesia coup before and after. Um, I would imagine, and I don't know him, I've not even looked at him, but I would imagine we're on different sides of just about every other issue, but there's no one that's done more investigation and investigative reporting and subsequently two different books on the Indonesia CIA coup. Like a long time before, and because they had an attempted coup and then an actual coup, than Professor Polgrain. And we've exchanged emails. And again, a brilliant man. And you have to be able to get over that, oh, he's a so and so, if you're going to ever find out the real truth. Because obviously, in most of these cases, as these people demonstrate, the truth is always somewhere in the middle. It is never going to be one person's 100% truth one way, because as we found out looking at the Phoenix program, some of their political leanings come into assumptions that they make. And a good author is going to tell you when they're making an assumption. And then you can take that part for whatever it's worth. But Doug Valentine got unfeathered access to many CIA people because he was granted the ability to write a couple of books about particular operations. And during those conversations, obviously, because the Phoenix program was one of the biggest programs they ever ran, that came up. And then he eventually wrote a book. And because of his unfeathered access, he has facts that no one else had because of his ability to talk to them. So take that for whatever it's worth. I let you know, obviously, if for those of you who've been around as we go through this information, I let you know, because obviously this isn't our first rodeo, when other people have said other things so that you can all form your own opinions. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to give you information for you to be able to form your own opinions. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into this. And just so that you guys know, so I don't cut anybody off at the end, if you guys have any questions about the material, I'm going to ask you to come up immediately and do it. We do have friends from Minnesota that I just found out is here, and we're going to go to dinner with them. So I will be leaving at about the 30-minute point at like 5:30. So I'll get done right around 5. And then we're going to have to jump off a little early. I will promise that I'll leave a little extra time tomorrow, but definitely don't want to miss my friends from Minnesota. They're totally awesome. And the daughter who's here is going to school over in Tampa, and it's her mom that is in town. And that's the daughter lived with us for 2 years, her first 2 years over at the university there. So she's in her final year of the program that she's in. And so she's going to be graduating this May. So definitely want to catch up with her. And she's living over there next to the college because of all of the different requirements. She didn't want to have to drive back and forth the 45 minutes. So I don't get to see her as often. So I'm really looking forward to tonight. All right. Back to the book. Strategy of tension remained confined to Italy for a long time. Well, and we obviously know the strategy of tension applied to everything because of the Fabian Society. But remember the conference that we were talking about that they had all attended and planned a whole bunch of the different stuff as part of the circle, the Paladin group. That's kind of where we left it all yesterday. So while Yves Sarratt did not attend that conference particular, many believe that the agenda that had been created for the conference was something that he produced as the key architect to it. Surratt, in turn, was likely influenced by many of the concepts from the OAS element that Otto Skorzeny had helped train, as well as Otto Skorzeny himself. During the 1950s, elements of the French armed forces had devised a counter-revolutionary doctrine based on the military writings of Mao Zedong and other proponents of revolutionary guerrilla war, as well as their own experiences fighting insurgents in the French Indochina War. This doctrine became known as basically guerrilla revolutionary war. As with the strategy of tension, proponents of this guerrilla warfare believed that the Third World War had already begun. Nuclear weapons had made the large-scale military conflict impractical, so the quote-unquote communist had developed a new type of war, which was subversive warfare. And by the way, it was not the communists that created that, but just we're going along with what the guy says. Now the Third World War was being waged by anti-colonialist surrogates in a bid to strip the West of its resources. That's kind of ass backwards, actually, but whatever. At the same time, the quote-unquote communists were also engaged in a full-blown psyops, to convert the West from within so as to conquer the populace rather than the strategic territory. That constituted a new form of total war. Now, again, this is the doctrine that they're trying to formulate in order to justify them doing the exact same thing. Because at this time, China had not invaded a whole bunch of other countries. They were still devastated by their own internal civil war, much like the Soviet Union devastated by World War II. And yet, these are the same people that they're trying to portray as the people that are going outside of their countries and scarfing up all of the resources. There weren't any Chinese other than the Taiwanese in Latin America. They weren't in Africa, except for the Taiwanese. And the Taiwanese were under the control of the CIA. So kind of crazy. But the author is telling you what these people were saying to justify their creation of guerrilla warfare. At the heart of this strategy was a potent blend of guerrilla and psyops that the West had to adopt. They didn't just adopt it and create it themselves in order to prevail in this war. The French theorists behind the guerrilla revolutionary warfare were especially concerned about three aspects employed by the quote-unquote communist guerrillas. Number one was and read this as if this is their strategy, by the way, parallel hierarchies that group together a host of clandestine and loosely aligned organizations into an all-encompassing infrastructure that could be used to exert social control as well as an alternative government to the existing one. Now, this is exactly what USAID was designed to do, by the way. This is exactly what NED was designed to do. This is exactly what the Transition Initiative, the Office of Trade, this is exactly what they were doing. Very telling that they project this onto the communists. Number two, action propaganda, which included propaganda directed at groups and thought reform employed against individuals. Thought reform, meaning you have bad thoughts and thought crimes are against the law. Number three, the ruthless but controlled use of terror to intimidate a population to psychologically separate them from the current government. There's no better way to explain what was done by Operation Gladio than those 3 points. The guerrilla revolutionary warfare would be vigorously embraced, no shit, by the French 5th Psychological Warfare Bureau, along with the Foreign Legion and the elite paratroopers, including the 11th Shock Brigade. Many of these forces, in turn, would help establish the OAS in 1961. Naturally, the OAS would play a significant role in the spread of this revolutionary doctrine. Clearly, all of the techniques advocated were adopted wholesale under the guise of the strategy of tension. The transmission point for these concepts was almost assuredly Guido Giannettini. Giannettini had extensive contacts throughout the international fascist movement and had made contact with the OAS as far back as 1961. He would become one of their principal agents. In 1964, he met Sirac, the Agenter Press head honcho, and would become one of Agenter's most active correspondents. And I'm going to put correspondents in parentheses as well, because they weren't actually correspondents. They were the actual guerrillas as part of Operation Gladio. Reportedly, he was a key liaison between Agenter Press and Delachau's AN, which was one of the Gladio cells in Italy that was used outside of Italy as well. Giannettini also allegedly was involved with Otto Skorzeny and the Paladin group. Well, of course he was, because he's the trainer of all of them. Let's see, this is further evidence that the Paladin was also a part of the strategy of tension. Of course it was. Sirac, Skorzeny, and Giannettini were also the ones who established the Organization Armée Communist International, which was the paramilitary wing of Agenter, i.e. Gladio in Portugal. As such, it is likely that Agenter Press played a key role in the spread of... Gosh, this guy's cracking me up. It's likely they did. No, they were it. By 1968, Agenter was active throughout Latin America, and reportedly its agents were in Chile in 1973 during the coup and before. Curiously, Nathaniel Davis, a former staff member of the National Security Council who served as ambassador to Guatemala during Agenter's terror campaign there, became the U.S. ambassador to Chile in 1971, just in time to oversee that coup as well. So he's making and we came across Nathaniel Davis when we actually talked about Chile. He is one of those ambassadors that shows up whenever they're going to do a CIA coup. Chile, in the years prior to Pinochet's coup, was clearly being subjected to the strategy of tension, which of course is true. So is Italy. Chile, in the early 1970s, witnessed the rise of fascist paramilitary organizations and the destabilization of the nation in the years leading up to the coup. By far, the most notorious of these groups was called Fatherland and Liberty, in which no one got liberty. By the early 1970s, the Fatherland and Liberty was a well-funded network. Now, because of the words in Spanish, its acronym is PL, but because of like the patriarch for Fatherland and then Liberty, so it's PL. It received support from many different places, including Christian Democrats who were publicly, who publicly would denounce it, although they were actually supporting it. And neighboring military dictatorships in Brazil and Bolivia actually helped Pinochet overthrow the government because, of course, the CIA is already there and has overthrew their government already. And it is a launching venue for other Operation Condor events in Latin America. Brazil provided the PL with $8 million, allegedly on behalf of the CIA. In other words, it is all the CIA, they're just funneling it through other entities. It is interesting to note that during the time PL's head, Pablo Rodriguez, was in regular contact with the US ambassador in Chile, Nathaniel Davis, because he's orchestrating it. PL leaders saw the organization as shock troops of the counter-revolutionary forces gathering against Allende. They were not counter-revolutionaries. They were the revolutionaries. And I have already explained to you guys how they misname these on purpose in order to eventually, if necessary, use the military. Instead of saying that they are the revolutionaries, they're the ones trying to overthrow the government, they refer to them as counter-revolutionaries so they can call the patriots that are going to attack them the revolutionaries, right? So they're the ones that are acting against the revolutionaries, and that's how they get the good guys as bad guys and the bad guys as good guys, is these types of words. And it matters when you're briefing people like special forces, because the special forces people are never considering themselves as the actual revolutionaries, like the actual agents of evil, when in fact, that's exactly what they are. But the CIA labels these people as counter-revolutionaries. And of course, we have counterinsurgency. So it just like lines up. Well, I'm a counterinsurgent. And those people are the counterinsurgencies to an insurgent force trying to overthrow the overthrow, if you can follow that logic. But that's literally what they do. And again, I've had people ask me, well, why would they do that? They do that because that's how they sell this bullshit in the media to Americans. You couldn't ever say, hey, they're all CIA bought and paid for agents and they're overthrowing the government, but we're going to help them do that. You have to come up with fancy names. So the PL leaders saw the organization. Let's see. All right. So these guys were patterned off of Hitler's brown shirts, though in this case, the membership was all dressed in black. Unsurprisingly, the PL had some interesting influences. One of them was national syndicalism, which served as a wellspring for Mussolini's concept of fascism in Italy. In other words, they were fascist. The fascists would also be inspired by Franco in Spain, who was also a fascist, and the guy in Portugal, who was also a fascist. So again, it goes to that point that we've made all along, that this was international fascism, and it was a movement that originated in the Fabian Society to create one world fascist government. Another significant influence was Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera, a founder of the Spanish Falangist movement. They were basically another element of fascism. The PL achieved significant notoriety from their involvement with the March of Empty Pots, a demonstration against the Allende government in Santiago. Upper-class women poured into the streets, banishing empty pots and ladles to protest food shortages. This was all orchestrated using CIA. The PL provided security for the demonstration, which quickly turned violent. The PL forces clashed against the police while the city filled with the clangs of women striking pots. Now, why would they get women to do that? Because the police is going to have to put down the riots, and the police attacking the women who are being paid by the CIA makes much better press against the Allende government than if you had a bunch of foot soldiers out there, or young men out on the streets doing some shenanigans. The March of the Empty Pots was a major success for the PL as it generated international condemnation for the Allende government. And that's why they do it. And that's the same reason why they send these survey teams in to do the preliminary look at these foreign countries. So they will get the, gay, the LB whatever community as the one that they're going to groom for street protests. So then when the government cracks down on them, it's because they're not open. It's because they're prejudiced, or they're homophobes or whatever. These are all orchestrated. So this further emboldened the PL militants because they saw what was happening in the international press, and they were being lauded as heroes by the CIA-owned international press. By the early 1970s, the PL had established a guerrilla training camp in Chile. There and elsewhere, where militants received training in things that looked strangely like Operation Gladio: arms, explosives, how to be an assassin, communication equipment. The later devastating effects of the final stages to the Allende government was basically one bomb attack per hour in the final weeks, every day. At least 24 bomb attacks every day for weeks. No doubt the PL had a part in this campaign. Michael Vernon Townley, the DINA contact with both Delachey and the Dignity Colony, had begun to collaborate with the PL as early as 1971. Townley initially aided the PL with the March of Empty Pots. Later, he was tasked with far more ambitious projects. In 1972, Townley had helped the PL establish an anti-government radio station from which it attacked the Allende government as well. He also mobilized youth gangs into neighborhood, quote unquote, defense units. Again, a play on words. They attacked Allende supporters. They had not a fucking thing to do with defense. Townley was forced into exile in the United States in 1973, where he was likely still aiding the PL movement by procuring plastic explosives in the Miami area and then using people in the CIA to smuggle them back into Chile. This, in light of all of the bombings in Chile in the run-up to the coup, was likely being supplied by Townley from the US, specifically from Miami. And keep in mind, Miami had entire warehouses of weaponry down there, from funneling all of that shit to the Cuba, the Cuban exiles to attack Guatemala, Cuba, Nicaragua. And a lot of that was being shipped out of ports in Miami, some of which was being shipped out of New Orleans as well, by the way. By all accounts, the efforts of Townley and the PL was a roaring success. By 1972, Allende was rapidly losing control of his country, because keep in mind, they're starving them too. They had stopped all shipping. They were blockading. They had naval vessels out off the shore. So there's a declaration of emergency that's declared. And then what happens? The CIA immediately calls him a dictatorship because he has to implement martial law because they're fucking taking over his country. The situation deteriorated from there when Pinochet came to power and created the dreaded DINA. The intelligence apparatus was quick to recognize the value of the PL, and the PL purpose was temporarily used and then eventually disbanded because they all joined the DINA. Its former members were in very high demand, and by 1974, they were all in the DINA. Well, a few of them got assigned to this elite unit that did intelligence, quote unquote intelligence. They were used as the coordination at the Dignity Colony with their big communication antennas to coordinate the finding of high officials in other countries in Latin America. Because remember, these things didn't happen all at once. And so what would happen is a lot of the former Allende government fled to nearby other countries. Then Pinochet, using that equipment at the Dignity Colony, would communicate to their counterparts in the other countries that they were there, and they would assassinate them. That's basically what they did to the one guy that was in Italy. It's what they did to the ambassador in downtown DC. And these are the guys that were doing it. Michael Vernon Townley first encountered Delachaux in 1975. Townley was struck by the similarities of their activities. Both men had been active in paramilitary organizations geared towards destabilizing governments, and both men had sought to align these organizations with military perspectives. Yeah, I'm sure that they were like shocked that they found each other. That's kind of naive, actually. The men hoped that the ensuing chaos would inspire a military coup. The major difference was that the military dictator had come to power in Chile, while in Italy it remained a democracy. And that would probably need to be in air quotes too. The objective of the strategy of tension was to bring about a military coup sympathetic to fascism, which succeeded in in Chile. The European efforts were a little different. They, like in the United States, and he basically says, they were not able to do what they needed to do in Europe as far as installing a military dictator. But that's actually not true. What they wanted to do for us, because we're funding it, all of Europe, NATO, us, our intelligence agencies are funding this around the world. So they could never actually do it in NATO proper. They had to fake it. So they had to pretend like they had a democracy, or, pretend like we're a republic, while they're robbing us of our wealth to fund this war machine of fascism all over the world. And by pretending to not have it here, they were able to convince us that there was no correlation between us and this rapid fascist movement of installation of dictators all over the world. So this is a plausible deniability kind of setup. So Europe looks kind of normal. We look kind of normal, although instead of doing like, like a vice grip, if you like spin the handle, it clamps down really fast. Instead of doing that, which they did in all of these other countries, ours was a much slower turning of the vice. So we got squeezed. It was just one little terrorism event at a time, like the train station bombing, then the bank bombing. Here, it was like Waco, and then we're going to do Oklahoma, and then we're going to do 9/11, and then we're going to do the Boston bombing. Our vice was turned much slower because we have guns, and doing that shit here would not have flown. So they did it under a cloak of deniability in a way in which that was in many respects much more evil, actually, because they would have never been able to do to us what they did to Allende. We wouldn't have put up with it. So I think the author's a little naive to think that they didn't get done what they wanted to do. Ours was just going to be a much slower death. Okay. As Pinochet's Chile made abundantly clear, the strategy of tension did not end with a favorable, um, let's see, wait a minute. The author is saying the strategy of tension did not end with a military, oh, he's talking about Europe, um, and the institutionalized security services, which I would argue we still have with the FBI and the CIA. Um, in the pre-coup years, terrorism was the chief instrument to traumatize a nation, which I argue is exactly what they did to Europe and us, and are still doing. With political assassinations being employed on occasion as well. Hello, we've had ours. Um, he goes on to say then, but torture also became a significant tool in the toolkit. The horrendous methods employed by DINA and other intelligence services in Latin America would become the stuff of legends. Torture, assassination were hallmarks of people disappearing. In Pinochet's Chile, their methods were flaunted so that the opposition would crumble. At the heart of these disappearances was the colony dignity. Countless opponents of Pinochet's regime were tortured there, with more than a few losing their life. The horrors awaiting opponents of Pinochet at the colony would become legend throughout Chile. The colony can also be seen as a key component in the strategy of tension, but there are also shades of action propaganda, a key component of this guerrilla revolution. Action propaganda emphasized both mass propaganda directed at groups as well as individual thought reform. Pinochet's Chile terrorism, another key component, itself became a crucial form of mass propaganda, which basically resulted in self inflicted thought reform. The colony's pre coup ties to West Germans BND, which of course is their CIA, and Galen, the Nazi, was linked to the circle from early on. This raises some interesting possibilities. The BND had grown out of the Galen organization, of course, I just pointed out, as a Nazi, who was later recruited by the US CIA. The organization that Galen was in charge of eventually becomes the BND, largely staffed by former Nazis. Galen worked with Otto Skorzeny, a former Nazi, who during World War II, his services were called upon repeatedly by Galen, and then also after World War II, when he took command of the BND. It will be recalled that Skorzeny and the Paladin Group were also in close alliance with the Genter Press and Giannettini. By the late 1960s and early 70s, Skorzeny had forged a close relationship with Delichet, whom Giannettini reportedly handled for the Italian Secret Service. It is Otto Skorzeny was obviously aware of the strategy of tension and was an active participant in it. Skorzeny was a guest at the colony. Skorzeny is likely to have played a critical role in bringing the strategy of tension, not just to Chile, but all of Latin America. And we know that's true because he was basically just the trainer. And so it wouldn't have been him that brought the strategy of tension. He was a worker bee in a much bigger operation. So the known connection between the colony and Michael Vernon Townley is quite clear. And that has implications, of course, of the CIA connected to the BND. And also keep in mind, you have the connection, which I always remind people of Crypto AG, which was the equipment that was installed in all of these, every country that we've talked about, Chile, Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, Uruguay, Paraguay, all had crypto AG equipment in their government, and that allowed both the German BND and the CIA to spy on them. And again, at the beginning, one of the very first questions I had, I thought that was weird. Honestly, I thought it was weird that the German BND and the CIA would go in together on, because Crypto AG, the original guy that created that encryption, was from Sweden, and he eventually moved the company to Switzerland. And there is a huge correlation between MI6 and this entire operation. And so it would have seemed to me that if they were going to go in and buy this guy's idea and then pretend that he's running the company when it's actually an intelligence operation, and he's just kind of the figurehead of a front company called Crypto AG. It seems to me that it would have lined up with the UK and the US like many other arrangements has. Like Five Eyes. Germany's not part of that. It just seemed weird. But if you step back to the 20,000 foot look and realize that Reinhard Gehlen in Germany was instrumental in the Nazi network that was exported from Germany to all of Europe, and then to all of South America, Latin America, and then to all of Africa, and then to all of the Middle East. There's literally Nazis sitting in all of these countries. It really makes perfect sense that the German BND and the American CIA would be the two backdoor access to this equipment, because they're the ones orchestrating these terror networks called Operation Gladio and Operation Condor. It makes perfect sense. And it took me a couple of months to be able to put those pieces together to realize how critical that equipment in Crypto AG was to this entire operation, because it allowed them, with these encrypted cables being transmitted throughout the world. Because you can imagine, if Chile's being attacked, they're obviously going to be talking to their ambassadors about what's going on in the ground in Chile to ask for help from other countries, and they're going to use their ambassadors to do that. And meanwhile, these fuckers are spying on every bit of it, so that they can, in advance, head off any of the ambassadors of Chile sitting in other countries to thwart any effort for anybody to help them. It's evilly brilliant that they did this. So it goes more to the whole overall motive and capability of this network that they had set up, that there's not ever going to be any help coming, because these people are in charge of the cabling that is going back and forth. And so they can cut it off, they can change it, they can edit it, they can do anything. And more importantly, they know what those governments are planning to do and can always be one step ahead of them. So that brings up the question, since anybody that studied this knows all of this stuff, right? We're not the only ones. I'm sure there's other people that know all of this. So what did the people that were behind President Trump and his initial election, and then during the last 4 years, what were they doing to do exactly the same thing? Because the only way you defeat these people is by looking at something very similar, in order to be able to always know in advance what their next move is going to be. And I know people talk about all of that forward-looking Stargate crap. It's as simple as having a system like Crypto AG, because that's how they did it. So I just want to make sure everybody stays on the same sheet of music with that. Okay, so the circle And elements of the Scorzini network went to such great lengths to protect the colony, despite all of the human rights abuses that was going on there, because it became a critical node in this entire operation. This would place the colony at the center of events that transpired in Chile, and the prospects are truly sinister because they lay bare the resurgence of fascism in South America and other parts of the world. As such, there was ample reason for any number of parties to ensure the colony would remain under the radar for years to come. Even now, 40 years later, most people have never even heard of it. Another possible transference comes in the form of a press. In the foreword to Hendrik Kruger's classic, The Great Heroin Coup, which I have and I have read, Peter Dale Scott alleges that Agenter Press, along with the Townsleys, worked directly with PL leading into the 1973 coup. And that is true, by the way. This, he thinks it's highly debatable. It's not even debatable at all. There are a lot of sources now that verify that. It is, let's see. If Scott's claim is accurate, it raises the possibility that the events that unfolded in Chile during the 1970s are directly linked to special operation, what he calls the Special Operation Mafia, which we call Operation Gladio. Agenter was part of the broader network via the Academy that leads us back to the Circle. And the Circle by the early 70s featured a contingent of SOE, which are the British veterans, and even OSS veterans, which, are now basically in the form of the CIA. But even some of them that went back into business are now members of the Circle, having already associated with the OSS during World War II and the Nazis in general, because they would have been part of the people that got these particular Nazis out of Nuremberg. During the 1950s, this alliance was first forged via the World Commerce Corporation, and by the time of the Pinochet coup, it seems to have being directed by the Circle and the Academy. The Academy, in turn, had direct links to Agenter, P2, and other militant Belgian groups. Agenter would have had access to Scorzini's Paladin group. Scorzini's Paladin group had access to everybody. They would have had access to the Circle and could use the veterans of all of these organizations in any of their operations, to include the French military OAS. There is also the SAS co-founder David Sterling's WatchGuard organization. WatchGuard organization. It will be recalled that Sterling's group was an affiliate of Paladin. Sterling was also close to several British Circle members. As such, the strategy of tension came to the colony. It was associated with the German BND. It was associated with the Palatine Group. It was associated with the Agenter Press. It was associated with Operation Gladio at large, and ended up in a huge tragedy. Groups like the Agenter Press and Paladin were responsible for importing the strategy of tension into Latin America via Operation Condor. The French military itself had also taught the concept of these tactics in Latin America as well. Chile and Argentina, in particular, had received direct instruction from French military, namely the OAS. Hence, fascism outfits like Agenter and Paladin are not necessary for the transference of the strategy of tension, but they've already got these cells that have been set up. And so at some point, they themselves don't need to do it because it's already been set up internally. The specter of the CIA among all of these, he says that the direct CIA intervention in the support of coups like in Brazil was, he says that there was no conclusive evidence that they were acting on behalf of the CIA. That's a flat out lie, because we have tracked all of this to the CIA. As a matter of fact, especially in Brazil, Jim Jones was there in the lead up to the coup. He left right before the coup, living in a State Department, um, a leased apartment that was leased through the State Department. He was driving a State Department vehicle leased to the State Department, and he had already set up Jonestown as a terrorist training camp that was right up the river. There's a big river that goes like literally all the way up there. And we talked all about Jim Jones having all of these ships. Why would he have these ships? Because he was shipping weapons, and he was shipping people to train them in terrorism. So this guy needs to do a little bit more homework. Okay. One last little bit. Regardless of the questions, the shock doctrine and the strategy of tension continued unabated. And with the reactionary drift, both in the US and the world as a whole, there were lessons to be learned by Pinochet's Chile and the colony. The trauma that was brought to society as a part of the strategy of tension had become institutionalized and was suffocating any form of resistance that tried to mount itself against the horrors that were being perpetrated on the civilians there, leaving them with a feeling of being conquered under the guise of guerrilla revolutionaries. And that kind of gets us to a good stopping point for our next session. So that's a lot. I'm sorry?
If this was ever more relevant than it is today, all of the information that we've uncovered is just so obvious in all of these headlines. You know, the patterns over and over, you know.
Well, what's interesting about all of the work that we've done for the last 2 years, the venue that is being provided right now with the unfunding of these and the unraveling of all of these things is so important. Just like if you guys haven't watched the show that I did on the OTI last night with Alpha, I highly suggest that you go look at that, because it's talking about one of those secondary layers that was instrumental in the orchestrating of all of this under the guise of USAID. And it is an office that I've not seen anyone talk about OTI on any venue. But wait till next week, because next week we're going to talk about the one that was the grossest one of all, that was responsible for all of the torture. And it was inside of USAID. It's hideous. But it's going to be a show-stopping show next week. But
I posted the link to that show for anybody looking for it in the purple pill and up in the net.
Thank you. Let's see. I did get the book. Colonel is adding a lot of her own information too. Yeah. So obviously, over on Rumble, 09 Cla 2 has bought the book. And obviously, I'm not going to read the entire book verbatim to you guys. I go through these books in advance and highlight the pieces, especially pieces that are new to us. Like the context in which this guy, which is the thing that kind of drew me into this, was we had already discovered the colony when we were looking at the origins of Operation Gladio in Europe, and how child trafficking to some degree is part of this entire human trafficking is a big element of it. But child trafficking into these really weird cult-like things because, of course, we did Waco, and it just kept coming up. Mark Dutroux, again, child trafficking. And so when we came across the colony and found out that that guy had been running an orphanage in Germany and had literally been under investigation for pedophilia and all kinds of crap and fled the country, only to end up in the center of what was in Operation Gladio, obviously, in Chile, as part of Operation Condor. It was like, what the hell? But most people don't make the connection of the colony being part of this whole thing. And so I found that fascinating. But again, there are parts of this guy, because he hasn't read the other 87 books, that he's not going to have. And since we have new people every time that we go through a new book, one of the things that I like to do is combine all of the knowledge that, and obviously that's why Bridget has been through this entire journey with me. The pieces that, and oftentimes when I'm on these shows, Bridget will be in the background, and if there's a piece that I miss, because that's a lot, she will shoot me a text, as a reminder, or if I can't remember a guy's name or the name of his organization, she's always there in the background to help me out. And Cousin It is there a lot, doing the same thing. And so all of this stuff, when we read a new book, that's the beauty of me doing it, is because I'm able to fuse everything that we have out here in the Netherlands of 75 other books into the current book that we're reading. And so I will embellish it with the stuff that I know, and I will call out, as I did with every single one of these, the pieces that I think they have wrong. You guys know that I absolutely love Cynthia Chung. We did her book over on Rumble as a book review early on. Brilliant woman. She seemed fairly sympathetic with FDR in that book, and I vehemently disagree with that. And I will tell you why. She obviously has her own opinion. But that's kind of the beauty in showing you both. She's, again, very, very smart. And we went through her reasoning of why she thought that she included in her book. I didn't talk to her about it. And then I tell you what I think based on what I've read. And then you guys can form your own opinion. And that's kind of the beauty. When I go through this, and I will tell what this guy thinks, I'll also tell you, based on, so-and-so's other book, that there's definitely connections where he says there aren't. And it may be that he just hasn't come across them. So anyway, what else we got?
That's another person that would be good to have on, wouldn't it?
I have tried to have her on a program. I have her number. We've texted multiple times. She is a very busy person. She's writing another book. So she has my number, and I've made it known that I want to have that discussion with her, because she is probably, other than obviously Paul Williams, the only other person that knows as much about Operation Gladio worldwide as I do. Someone in Danielle Ganser's book, which is, of the books I just got asked today, what's your top three? I would tell you my top three is obviously Paul Williams' Operation Gladio is number one. And Danielle Ganser's, Ganzer's, NATO Secret Army is 100% my second, always. But I had on my number three list Cottrell, who had wrote about particular operations. While it's a good book, I have now switched my number three position to William Bloom's book, Killing Hope. And I'll tell you why I did that. William Bloom's Killing Hope does not talk about Operation Gladio at all. What it does do is it talks about every single coup the CIA's been involved with. And he actually goes before World War II to give you a flavor that this didn't just start with World War II. He talks about the stealing of Hawaii, he talks about stealing Panama. And then he goes through basically all of the post World War II CIA coups, and he does it in a chronological order, I think. That his book became the Bible when we did our world tour. I always started with his book in preparing for every country. We didn't cover every single country he covers in that book, but it was my foundational read. And then I would go get extra material, more recent stuff, people's from other viewpoints about a particular country. But he was my number one go-to. And what I think it does, even though it doesn't mention Operation Gladio, and he probably doesn't even know anything about Operation Gladio, I don't know whether he does or not. What it does do is it helps all of us understand how fucking active this has been. And how many things they have done. And he also talks about the resources that they were after when they did it. And that is one of the only books that I have seen that puts together the motivation of the international syndicate with the evilness of Operation Gladio to carry it out. And so if you guys are interested, I would definitely add that book to your library as a must read, because it doesn't have every single thing that we've come across, but it has probably 90% of them. Go ahead, Bridget.
And just to let everyone know, including those over on Rumble, I've been going back through the older videos and getting the titles all on there and the descriptions all on there correctly, and setting up playlists so that if you guys do want to go back and listen to a particular book, click on the playlist. It will have just that book, like just Operation Gladio, just Empire on the Black Sunset. And so when you're catching up or just want to go deeper into this, and follow in the footsteps we've already traveled, since we have so many new people, and the Rumble link is in the Colonel's profile for anybody who's interested. And we also have it pinned in the pinned post for the recorded spaces.
So obviously, we've learned a lot from our very first books. And really, the history is Cynthia Chung's book, because it goes back to the Fabian Society. Now, obviously, other people like this guy here has made that connection too, and he's probably read Cynthia's book for that matter. She did to me the best historical dig as it relates to that. But other books that you guys would never even by the title think has anything to do with Operation Gladio. For example, Whitney Webb's book, One Nation Under Blackmail. You would not think that book, because it's primarily on the cover, it looks like it's a book about Epstein. But she goes back to the mafia and them dealing during World War II, the creation of the OSS, the creation of the CIA, and walks through the entire thing and never mentions Operation Gladio once. And yet her entire first volume is Operation Gladio. And so she does a lot of conversations about things that happened in Latin America. Never mentions Operation Gladio. So in the second volume. And obviously, all of it has to do to include the blackmail of President Clinton. All of that has to do, because as we have said repeatedly, Operation Gladio is a paramilitary capability ran out of NATO that involved drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and human trafficking. and blackmail is the grease that keeps the wheel moving. And so all of these blackmail rings are part and parcel of how this entire thing continues to operate. Because without the blackmail element, they'd never be able to control the people involved in doing all the bad shit. So somebody says Jonestown, Guyana was the former French Guiana colony with Devil Island Prison. The particular area where Jonestown is, that property, prior to the moving of the quote unquote church out of San Francisco and down to Guyana, had been a staging area for terror training camps. When it was originally cleaned out, it was cleaned out, deforested, whatever you want to call it. We later found out, and this is complete speculation, but we later found out that if you look at the border of Guyana with Venezuela, it's right next door. Now, we already know that down in Colombia, that they were moving as recently as like in the last couple of years, they were moving people that they had trained in terrorism, like paramilitary people, into Venezuela from these bordering countries. And if you go back and you look at the timing of when we were first destabilizing Venezuela, it lines up with when Jim Jones was down there preparing the troops that they were going to use in Brazil in the early 1960s. And so it's just a very interesting research project when you start going country by country, and then you kind of zoom out and you look at what the residual effects of all of this crap has been and how it overlaps with so much of our history and the things that has gone on here. So, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, I'm just a little confused about the comms being intercepted. And I'm sorry if I'm just being stupid, but were they intercepting the comms to read them and then sending different data? I was just a little unclear about how deep they could go in fucking their comms.
They could actually do whatever they wanted with them. The machines, the hardware, if you will, of Crypto AG. So you can think of Crypto AG as like the old-fashioned telegraphs. Okay. In the old days, when you had a telegraph machine, you had somebody sitting on one end and they send the telegraph to the other end. Crypto AG was an encrypted version of a transmission of a message. Now, I would have, and I'm just talking generically, I'd have a box in the embassy. And like, for example, let's just talk about Chile. If I'm sitting in Chile in the whatever their version of the State Department is called, and I wanted to communicate with all of my ambassadors at one time, I type up a message, I input it into Crypto AG, and that message goes to all of my ambassadors' offices around the world. Crypto AG had a station in Panama on the Army base as their communication center for all of South America. So all of the South American state departments of Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, all of their quote unquote encrypted communication came to that node, that hub. And from there, it was transmitted to their in-state ambassador offices. So they could literally do anything they wanted with it. They could transmit it intact making no changes to it at all. And by doing that, obviously, if the Secretary of State was telling the ambassadors that they were under attack and that they had caught, let's just say, like when they caught Dan Meteroni torturing all of their people, hey, the CIA's got a guy down here they've sent down here. He's in the basement of this rented State Department in Chile, and and he's torturing all of these people and teaching these guerrilla revolutionaries how to torture people. They could change that message before they send it on, or they could send it on, but now the CIA knows that they know. And so whatever it is, no matter what it is they're doing, and they had the capability to do all of that. They had the capability of just reading it. They had the capability using these nodes to change what they were transmitting. But even if it was just as benign as them reading everything that was being sent, that gave the CIA and the Germans in their networks the advantage, because let's just say that the State Department in Chile says before the coup ever happened, hey, I'm going to shut down this or that, like the newspaper that the USAID people, the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA, whoever, was funding. Let's just say that the Chilean government discovered routing money from the United States that was paying the most vocal newspaper down there to print shit about if they were going to do something about that, normally the State Department in Chile would have sent to Ambassador Lettier, who was their U.S. ambassador, hey, we know this guy's doing this, and before we pick him up, we're going to allow the United States the opportunity to do something about it. They can either, extradite this guy, they can get him out of here, they can do whatever. But just the fact that they knew, that the CIA knew that someone in the Chilean government was on to them, was a strategic advantage to them. And, if they had discovered the colony and what it was doing, and they had happened to send a cable to the the Chilean ambassador in Germany, hey, you need to go talk to the Germans because they got a bunch of shit going on down here, and it all came from Germany. Knowing everything that foreign government knows and is communicating to all of its ambassadors is a jackpot when it comes to any type of operation. And all of this was done. It went on there was over 120 countries hooked up to this crypto AG. It went on until 2020. Trump disassembled that company. This is from World War II.
Crazy. We don't hate these people enough.
We don't hate them enough. So true. SR71, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending. I think it might help concerning Crypto AG if you look at Operation Rubicon. Operation Rubicon is exactly what the Colonel is talking about at this moment, and what was done concerning communication. The other thing I want to note is what's going on here in the U.S., and as the Colonel so elegantly put it, we have been led down a primrose path very subtly. And to break that subtlety is what we are trying to do. And we're doing a good job of it, I think, at this point. And the more we can share all this stuff and the more we bring it out, I believe we can stamp this thing out. Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. The only thing that I would caution you on is if you just do a cursory look at Operation Rubicon, it makes it appear that it only started in 1970. That is not true. That is when they orchestrated the purchase of Crypto AG from during World War II. The man that created Crypto AG, he basically worked and did work for the NSA, right? That he came up with their original encryption, because his story is very, very old. And he was a very loyal person to the United States, and basically gave them complete control. He was a figurehead, but he owned Crypto AG, set it up in Switzerland, and ran it on behalf of the BND and CIA behind the scenes. Well, his son thought that he was going to inherit the company, and the CIA got a little antsy because the son was not as pliable as the dad. And they thought that they were going to have problems. As a matter of fact, they did have problems because one of their coders, see, nobody that worked at Crypto AG knew what they were doing. They didn't know they were spying. They thought they were running an encryption company. And the salesman went out and sold this shit thinking it was 100% no back doors, nobody could spy on this. And they thought they worked for a legitimate company. And the only reason that they figured out that it was not a legitimate company, some of them, is one of the guys tried to, he found some code that he thought made it vulnerable. He found the back door. In other words, that's the best way to say it. He found the back door. And when he was not allowed to fix it, he knew what was going on and he quit. All right. One of their salespersons, Iran, found out that because they had bought the equipment, they found out through a really weird sequence of events that the equipment was compromised. They arrested the salesman the next time he came in to switch out the boxes or update a code or whatever. And he was in jail for a year. They charged a ransom to get him out. And then the company tried to charge the guy to reimburse the ransom they had to pay to get him out of Iran. It's a crazy, crazy story when you go down that Crypto AG rabbit hole. But what happened is when the CIA and the German BND approached the old man and said, look, we don't think your son is as good as you are as far as loyalty goes, and you're getting really old. So what we would like to do is we would like to buy the company, and then we're going to hire a fake company, and we're going to pay them 10% of the profits. And this was a very profitable company, by the way. It generated millions of dollars for the CIA and the German BND. And we're going to pay this front company 10% of the profits to pretend that it's a front company. And then we're going to buy it. And that's what happened in 1970. And that's why most of the people, when they talk about this, think that the whole thing started in 1970. It absolutely did not. It started in World War II, and it was implemented immediately after that. And it was just done under that guy, the old man. And he was basically being a front for the CIA and the German BND. And then, like I said, when he got old enough and they thought he might die any day, they officially changed it over to this other front company and pretended this other company was running it for 10% of the profits. So thank you for bringing that up, SR71. Okay. And it changed hands a couple of times, changed names a couple of times. But if you follow the timeline, it was finally disassembled in 2020. And that was quite a row to try to find out how, because like I said, it was bought, it changed names, but we did it. All right. Anybody else got anything? I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to jump off here. I appreciate everybody being here. And we will be back tomorrow. And I don't think I have anything in the morning tomorrow. Nope, just our 4 o'clock space. Okay, so we'll be back here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you very much. And we will continue in our book tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thanks for being here. Okay. Rumble audience. Let's see. Thanks for your hard work. You're welcome, Silk Purse. Kelly, please put links to the platform you are engaging with. Thank you. I don't know what she's talking about. Hopefully, oh, Bridget's got it. Okay. Killing Hope. Yeah, that's the name of the book, Renee. What an appropriate book, too. Because it definitely was killing people's hope that they were ever going to be able to live free if they had any resources in their country. Okay. Weird. We're having a glitch before. Funny X base seems stable today. Oh, it's always something. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll be back tomorrow at 4.